Welcome to episode 151. That's the proof of our awesome art show that we do every week. We're just that hardcore. But anyhow, welcome to episode 151 of Artcasters. And this is the show that alternates every week between myself and Scott Strickland's channel, where we talk about like some of the components of like being an illustrator, a graphic designer, cartoonist. Like we're all kind of people who wear many hats, and this show rotates between myself and Scott Strickland's channel, and then we have a rotating guest chair. And this week's special guest is somebody you guys who have followed this show for a while are familiar with because he used to be a co-host on here. So it's our buddy Kevin Cross.
Hey everybody. And the rad thing is my chair does rotate.
Yeah.
You should make that a requirement.
Yeah.
It must actually physically rotate.
Yeah.
What about you, Josh?
No, I think we do have rotating.
there we go.
Yeah.
See, that's a pun on cartooning right there. Because you need a rotating chair. It's in our tips and tools.
Yeah, that's right.
So for this week's topic, we thought it would be cool to kind of and kind of topical to kind of discuss logo design, and I want to kind of take a little bit of a backseat on this one because of the fact that like I've done logos professionally, but it's not my specialty. It's not necessarily something I'm weak at. It's just something I haven't delved into a lot, and so I'm just gonna have a lot of questions. But I know Kevin is currently working on some logo designs. Scott is like branding, guru guy. And so it's like we have some guys that are really good at logos. And so to me, I'm kind of wanting to crack it open and kind of get into that as a topic, like what you consider when you get into logo design and so on. And it's topical for me too, because I do have a few logo designs that I want to do. And I've hit some brick walls with the clients on that, where it's like there's trying to get them to give a vision board or like an idea of like a vision to make an effective logo design. So like maybe you guys will have some tips and strategies on that too. So
yeah, I was gonna say, Josh, it's also good for you as an art director, the angle, because you do a lot of products, and I'm sure you're putting a lot of logos on those products. So that's definitely something to consider when you're doing a logo, is that it can fit on multiple different products and still be legible and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah. And I mean, I deal with style guides and logos all the time. And even from those, it's like, there's certain placement that you need around logos to make them work and stuff like that. But I am curious. Like, I'm curious to hear your guys' kind of experience with logos and like what goes into the thinking in a logo. I think that, I'm suspecting that we've all probably had different angles of logos that we're kind of specialized in too. And so, yeah, so let's get into it. Let's get into branding. How do we even start this one?
I can start. Like I'm basically doing, I'm pretty much doing a rebrand of my basically CircWorks. And I didn't even realize this till probably maybe a month ago. But so 2019 will be I formed CircWorks in 1999. So it's going to be 20 years for CircWorks. And it's seen a lot of changes. I mean, in the beginning, it wasn't like what I'm doing now. It was more character design studio, but it's kind of changed. But it's always been CircWorks. Now it's sort of CircWorks Art Labs. But I'm working on I launched a new website, but there's still some things that I'm doing for that. Like there's going to be a blog section, but my first blog is basically going to just be me going through the history of my brand from way back in 1999 up until today, and how it's kind of changed and everything. But so I've made some minor changes to my logo type and my icon and all that kind of stuff. And just when we talk about branding, we might want to explain a little bit what branding is. And I mean, different people have different descriptions for branding, but branding isn't necessarily in a logo. Branding is more, the logo is definitely part of your brand, but a brand, the easiest way for me to explain what a brand is, it's basically your reputation. So it's like what other people think of you, what comes to their mind when they think of you is pretty much your brand. So you don't always have total control over your brand. I mean, you can kind of steer it in certain directions and show people kind of what you want it to be, and hopefully people sort of agree with that and fall and carry that through. But ultimately, a brand is just basically how other people see you. And then you've got your logo design, and there's everything from not just the logo design, but all the different graphical elements and all that kind of stuff. So, but as far as just the logo design, a while back, and I wish I remember who it was, but I got some really, they were unsolicited critiques, but they were really good critiques. And this person just kind of told me some things that I probably already knew, but I wasn't really thinking about, but like how, through my YouTube, I'm pretty much front and center, me, the guy with the green lab coat and everything, but that wasn't really part of my brand. So I created like a caricature of myself in the green lab coat, which is, you can, on the new website, you'll see that. The regular logo, the little CircWorks guy, I call him a hinge minion. It's a robot hinge minion, the guy that you kind of see with the hard hat and everything. That was kind of the mascot before, and it still is sort of, but it's kind of like not the main thing. I still use it as sort of my icon. But the other thing was I had it was basically like Crossbones, where it would have, the old logo had, the head of my little CircWorks guy, which you can still see on most of my stuff. I still haven't transitioned everything to this, but so it was just the head, but then it was like, there was a Wacom stylus or Wacom, or however you pronounce it, and then a wrench. But the wrench didn't really make much sense. And this guy actually pointed that out as one of the things. I'm like, yeah, that it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Why is there a wrench there? So right now I kind of just did some changes to that. So right now it's like 2 test tubes pointing out the top, and then the bottom one is like a digital stylus, and the other one is more like a traditional, like either like a tech pen or something like that, or
that's like a
micron
Copic maybe or something.
Yeah.
I'm at your site now.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So that's going to change. I mean, that's right now, that's basically like what in game design we call the MVP, the minimum viable product. So it's something that I'm happy with, and I'm not ashamed to show it, but there's still a lot more coming. There's going to be a newsletter and, a cool offer that when you log on, you'll be able to get that thing for free, and the blog, and then I'm going to have a digital store and a bunch of other stuff. But right now, so that's up there. But really my goal is like the first of the year, the anniversary of CircWorks, is when I kind of want to have the full site done and launch all that stuff. So I've been thinking a lot about branding lately for myself, but that's kind of where I am. But it sounds like you've been doing some like logo designs and stuff too, Kevin. So
yeah, I have. Yeah, now I don't know if my approach is correct, since what you're saying in the beginning, because usually what I think, so I'm doing some logo stuff for clients, and then right now tonight I'm working on a logo for myself for a band I'm in, and one of the companies I'm working for deals with disabled elderly people,
mm-hmm.
which is much different than me doing a whiz bang pow comic book logo, because certain things have to be communicated in a way,
right?
And then the band logo that I'm working on tonight is completely different, because it's basically your like post-punk death rock, pseudo goth kind of punk kind of band. So somehow I have to incorporate upside down crosses and pentagrams into that, and but that's kind of how I start. Is I think, what do I want to communicate, and what I'm hearing you say is like, you might want something to communicate, but really the crowd is going to dictate,
right?
At the end. So, but nonetheless, we don't have a crowd yet, with this band.
But with the logo, I don't know that's with the logo, when I said that, I meant like the tire brand, you know, and kind of, so, I mean, the logo is just part of that. So, I mean, you can, the logo you do want to, I think, and of course, a lot of this is just opinion, but I think you can create the logo, what you feel the company, what direction you feel the company should go in. And other people might, you know, see it differently or whatever. But I think you have a little more freedom to set up that direction you want to go in when you're designing the logo. So,
right.
The,
Sorry.
The thing that I was gonna just chime in on was like the origin of the word, like, you know, brand, which is like a cattle brand.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, you know, the idea of a brand for a company is literally, well, it's not literally, but it's metaphorically to burn your imprint on consumers.
Right.
That's like the harsh kind of version of it. It's like you're literally just trying to kind of burn it in people's brain. And so what your logo, it depends on your, like, to me, I'm excited that Kevin, like, you know, what you're working on for your band and then what you're working on professionally, that provides this like giant, awesome kind of juxtaposition, because there are rules to logos, and then there are also different things you're trying to communicate that might even break all of those rules in order to fit like a different brand. So, because general like branding, like you can look at my logo right here and it breaks like a bunch of the rules, because it's going old school kind of Victorian, and it's not very reducible and it's really complex, you know. And rule of thumb that I've heard on logo designs is like, you want it to be workable in black and white. You want it to have a strong silhouette that'll read from a far distance. You want it to work on a business card or on like a billboard. Like it should be able to function at any size. And so when concepting a logo, it's good to like work on it at the size of like, you know, a dime or a nickel. Like when you're kind of like, just make sure you have a version that's there just to see like, will this thing reduce? Could this be like put on the tag of a t-shirt, you know? Yeah. And those are things that come into play. But all that said, if I'm like making a death rock logo, I would be so bummed if it's easily legible. Like, well, I want it to be a little illegible, not as illegible as like, you know, a metal band, like, but slight. I don't know. I don't know if I'd want it to be so simple that it could be reduced to that tiny size.
But your actual, like, okay, so there's Christian Death that kind of has like a real jagged logo and stuff like that. Yeah. But most death rock bands are like, their logos are actually kind of boring. Like Susie and the Banshees and Bauhaus.
Yeah.
They're mostly like just plain serif fonts.
Yeah.
You know?
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so, but we were going for more like you know, like Cramps, Misfits, that kind of stuff. So, but that's also kind of been done where it's like spooky movie writing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not going to be clean, but it's not going to be like black metal where it just looks like, you know, my band's logo is a spider web. You know? My band's logo is dead trees. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah. But like the approach to it's going to be a lot different than when you're like doing a children's hospital, you know?
Right.
Like, because and I think that comes into play. Like for me, like one of my frustrations with the logo that I would like to design eventually is that I'm trying to get the client to sort of give a clear communication of what they want the logo to say. And I think that's one of the core things you got to get from a client before kind of commencing on a logo, unless they want something generic. It's like you need to get like that core thing that makes their business different. Yeah. Like what is it about your business that, and this is something I've asked, like the few logos I've done, that's what I've usually tried to get out of the client is, what's the thing about your business that defines your business that's not generic? So it doesn't have words like quality, because that's a useless word. You know, it's words that are targeted that like other businesses, you know, aren't going to like claim. Because otherwise then, you know, if you don't get that, and even if you're thinking about your own business, I think this is applicable. But if you don't get that key sentence, that thing, the little vision board, the main like driver for your logo, what the thing is you want to communicate, then you're gonna end up with like best coffee, which is like, best coffee. I don't know if that's a company. Like there's a lot of best coffees,
Yeah.
So it's one of those things of like, do you want to be like a generic donut shop, or do you want to be a whole successful donut chain that's like, dude, that's like a crazy brand that I recognize,
Second best donuts. You never seen
second
that.
best donuts. That's actually a really good idea for a business to call yourself second best.
I saw, and I don't remember, maybe you guys have seen it. I'm trying to remember where it was. I might have been on the way to California or something, but I remember that there's these series of billboards that say really good jerky. It's like, why call yourself the best? Why, it's really good. It's good enough.
When I lived in San Francisco, I used to live around the corner from this burger joint. It was either called Darcy's or Darla's. I can't remember now, but the tagline was possibly the best burger in San Francisco. And I went there. It possibly was.
There was I'm trying to remember what it was. I can't remember, but it was something about something saying that it was the best, and it was absolutely not. But so you can call yourself whatever you want, but that comes down to, that's what I was talking about with branding. You could say you're the best coffee in town, but if you're not, the word's going to get out and it's not going to mean anything,
But I mean, like, that's the thing. If your logo's just saying, "Hey, I'm the best coffee in town," like, what's differentiating you from every coffee joint calling themselves the best coffee in town?
Right.
So that's like the core thing that I try to think about when branding and stuff like that. But it's very hard to get that out of clients, because at the end of the day, most clients do want the same thing. Like, they want strong customer service, So it's like, how do you they want like global reach. So it's like a lot of the words they use will inevitably end up with like a globe or a dove or like a hand, like, and a handshake, because it's like, you know what I mean? And there's this iconography that's like the obvious choice. And to me, the thing that kills me on logo design is when I see something like the FedEx logo, where it's like,
oh yeah,
arrow hidden in there, and it's like the simplest solution, but like nobody thought of it, and it says everything it needs to say, and it is kind of obvious, but it's subtle, and it's a hard solution.
Yeah, those ones, the other two that are really good are like the Baskin Robbins 31, where the B and the R make the 31, and also like Amazon, where it's the A with the pointing to the Z. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. But even like, I mean, those things are so great, and if they can work on, if you can get a logo to work on like 2 levels, or if you can get a logo to work on 3 levels, I mean, those are like, that's the gold. But I mean, I've been guilty of doing things that are cliche, but sometimes cliche works, because especially now that we're in like the digital age, and I fought over like logo designs and certain things. Like I at one point I was doing something for like a film studio, and I was using film, like a film strip or something. And they said, well, we don't really deal with film anymore. It's all digital. But how do you show digital? So, I mean, sometimes it's even like when you go to save something on your computer, what are you clicking on? You're clicking on a disc from back in the 80s, an icon of a disc from back in the 80s. No one uses those anymore, but people know what that means. So sometimes, now that we're in the digital age, sometimes you have to equate that to something physical. So there's that. And again, sometimes you just have to go with cliche, because that's what people get. So a lot of times with logo, you're trying to boil it down to its essence. So that does mean getting a little cliche. Now, if you can do something other than a globe or something, or the obvious, then that's good too. But I wouldn't be too ashamed of going too obvious, as long as you can put a sort of unique spin on it, or you can work it in a way where it's sort of, it doesn't look just like a globe. There might be a globe in it that's sort of hidden or something like that. But yeah,
no, I hear you. And like, it's funny, Ox just pointed out in the chat, he said, if you look at Josh's intricate logo and his busy shirt, then look at Cirque's simplistic logo and his simple design shirt. And then he said, and then Kevin's like logo and branding is a nice middle ground of those both. And like, I actually think that's a good point, because I think we're both like, I think all three of us are capable of probably doing any of those three logos, you know?
Right. And each one of those logos represents us. That's what we're talking. So your logo, I mean, your logo, even though it is very, very detailed and complex, but it represents you. I mean, that when I think of Joshua Kemble, I think of the guy that's spending tons of time on his work, really just meticulously designing and everything, laying out every pages, where if you look at my stuff, it's basically, I'm just trying to get pages, real quick sketching. My pencils are very loose. I usually do everything in the ink. So, I mean, but yours really tells a story about who you are. Yeah. So, I mean, and I think that's, and that's super important. So.
Yeah, and I think that, like, I think that the thing that's interesting is I think it's because our logos are trying to communicate different things. And so it's like my logo was intentionally like too busy to be a standard logo, but my logo is literally just trying to show off a little bit. That's literally, so I was just going for like making things so busy and so detailed and hand done, just to be like, yeah, I can do this, and that's literally the point of it, is like to have, somebody go, you did this by hand, and be like, yeah, that's it.
And it, go ahead.
I think to me it also communicates with you, and that's what I think of you as being like, you're, when we've talked about comics, your standard is a bit higher, than like a fart joke. It's like, or a mainstream comic. It's more literature. You know what I mean? And your logo to me says more like the old book plate looking stuff. It's more just a higher class brand of literature.
Yeah, and that's the aim of it. Like, because I'm not like out hunting for like work that's more viable at this point. If I were hunting for work that was more viable, I'd probably simplify my logo a little bit, because, like, once again, like, most people aren't going to want like a crazy complicated logo. And so the interesting thing with like Scott, like, your logo very much shows your crazy skills with like color, with type layout, and with like clean, beautifully executed illustration. It's like, it's very tight and coherent and like professional. And when I see it, it's fun too. So it's like, it's kind of communicating to me that it's fun, that you are like, I mean, even the whole thing feels like a cog a little bit. I mean, it's like you're a work machine is what that kind of logo says. And I think that's, that effectively kind of lays out, and also it gets into some of the geek culture stuff too, which is great. So it's like, and Kevin, your logo is like a callback. I mean, it feels like a callback to like old school cartoons, and it's got this vibe of just kind of traditional fun, and yet it's also got some punk rock in there, which is awesome. So it kind of says everything it needs to say, because it's like your art kind of, it's got a punk rock edge a lot of the time, but it's also like really like cartoon modern influenced, and like, and it can range from like cartoon modern to like, classic like skate art and classic like, underground cartooning and stuff. And so it's like, it's this weird thing where I think all of our logos are communicating separate things, and I think that's intentional.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that bums me out more than like seeing, especially illustrators who don't pay attention to their logos or their type, because I feel like you're really missing a big tool in your tool belt. Because like a bad typeface on great art looks unprofessional, Yeah. And it's really unfortunate, because I see that all the time with illustrators, like especially fresh out of college, where they're like, look at my illustration, and you're like, well, your type's not really. And they're like, yeah, but I'm no good at type. And I feel like that's a cop out, because I think if you're a good illustrator, you can get good at type, like easy. Because type compared to illustration, I don't think it's that complicated.
Yeah, and I would say if you aren't strong with type, if you're stronger with illustration and you're not strong with type, just the thing I always say is just don't go crazy. Just do something very simple.
Yeah.
Simple can work fine, but the problem is some people that maybe illustrators may like to play around a little more with the type. If they don't understand it, then it's probably going to look bad. So if you're not quite adept at using type and everything, just keep it simple, even like a Helvetica or something like that. But because you can't go, it's hard to go wrong with just keeping it simple.
Yeah, well, I mean, keeping it simple, the Monkey Mud logo, that's Helvetica new.
Yeah.
Except for, I skewed it and sheared it, and I changed the O and, tweaked it a little bit, but it's because it's a mod comic and it needs to be like crisp.
Yeah. And it's hard to go wrong with Helvetica,
Yeah.
It's just, that's why it's like the most famous, most popular font.
I'll tell you how to go wrong with Helvetica.
Okay.
One word, Arial.
That's not going wrong. That's not Helvetica, though.
Type nerd joke. In the chat, Scott, the other Scott, I'd rather be drawing, asks, what's your thoughts on typewriter font? And he said, I kind of love it, but does that make other artists roll their eyes?
It depends on what you use it for.
Yeah.
Like, a few years ago, a lot of years ago now at this point, Mark Rudolph, who was on Art and Story back in the day, him and we decided that we wanted to do like a punk heavy metal like zine in the style that they were done in the 80s, when you just had typewriters and Commodore 64s and Amigas and Atari 2s or whatever those first things were.
Yeah, and glue sticks.
Yeah, and glue sticks. Yeah, totally. And so that's what we did, but we did it all with Illustrator and Photoshop. We did some illustration, but if we decided to use a photo, we tried to make it look like it was Xeroxed, and then put typewriter font with it, and it works.
Yeah.
Because it invokes the feeling that we were going for. So, and I think enhanced it. And we use a couple other different fonts too. Like, is it the flyer font that was like the rub-on letters? Is that the font for that? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we'd use that, and then we kind of mess it up because those rub-on letters never came on great.
Yeah.
And things like that. So, so my answer is no. I don't roll my eyes at typewriter.
No, I like the typewriter font. And the one thing, and again, you have to kind of understand type a little bit, but think of type pairings. And usually when you're pairing type, you want to have, a lot of times you like pair like a sans serif font with a serif font. And basically what that is, like serifs, if you're not familiar, are like a typewriter font is a serif font. It's those little, I don't know what you call them, those little hanging things off the side. Like if you, like in Times New Roman or something, you've got these little things off.
Yeah, hanging chads. I think.
Hanging chads. Yeah, I don't think that's what they're called. But that's from voting from back in the anyway. People in Florida know what hanging chads are. But yeah. So I mean, if you go to my website, you'll see I use basically two fonts. Not my logo. My logo, that's something separate. But the fonts that you see, there's a really bold font, and then there's like a poster font, which is more of a script font.
Yeah.
And and I don't use, and you don't want to go, there's some people that I forgot her name, but there's this one artist who just can use like tons and tons of different fonts, and her stuff looks amazing. But that's kind of, you want to be careful with that. I would stick to like usually 2 or 3 fonts.
Yeah. Like a good rule of thumb is just like 3 max.
Yeah.
And, it's weird. There's just this thing with 3s in design.
Yeah.
In general, with like composition, splitting things in 3s, like color looks out of place unless it's in 3 different locations. It's
Yeah.
really weird.
And that doesn't, that doesn't include like your bold and your thin. Like one thing when you're using a font, like if you're planning on doing a lot of different materials, you probably want to pick and it's also good to actually like purchase a font. Like because there's free fonts out there and you can make them work for certain things. But for the most part, a good font that you're going to use for like your body copy and all that kind of stuff, you want something that's like a full type family where it's got your bolds and your italics and your thins and your condensed and all that kind of stuff. If you can find a good font like that, that's something to think about.
Yeah. And your font, like what Kevin was bringing up about typewriters, really good with like the zine and stuff. It's like, to get certain looks, you might need certain fonts. Like if I want for instance, if I wanted my graphic design to look like a flyer for a church youth group in the 1990s, then I would use Papyrus. So like there's a function for everything. Like if a client hired me and they were like, I really want to make my branding look like a church youth group in the 1990s. I'd be like, dude, I usually hate this font, but Papyrus is your font, sir.
I still think I think Papyrus is one of those where it's just been overused so much. I mean, in the beginning, I still think it's a nice font, but it's just been overused so much that it's just, and people use it in the wrong way, and now even if you use it in the right way, it just stands out because people know, and it's a joke like Comic Sans.
I'm 100%. I kind of can agree with you because I'm guilty of using a hated font like when it was fresh, and so now like that's one of my more known designs, and yet it's using Bada Boom, which is like one of my least favorite fonts.
You know how I feel about that one, guys.
Well, here I'm gonna let you guys know that I created a font that's an alternative to Bada Boom. So because again, Bada Boom is not a bad font. It's good font for comic book stuff, but it's just overused.
It's also terribly tracked. So if you
I spent so much time with the kerning on this font that there may be some. It's so hard to kern stuff because there's so many different letter combinations. There's millions, so there may be something you might have to self kern a little bit, but I kern the hell out of this thing, and it will be available for free, like as like a thing to join my mailing list, like hopefully near the beginning of the year. But yeah, so it's basically, it'll give you the same effect as Bada Boom, but it's not going to be so common. So just a little teaser. And the other thing, what was I going to say? Oh, the other thing, as far as like overused font, there's a font right now that it's a free font, but it's a really nice font. But I am afraid that it is going to become the next Bada Boom or the next Papyrus or Comic Sans. Well, Comic Sans is just kind of crap all the way around, in my opinion. But there's so many other great comic book fonts, comic lettering fonts. But I don't know if you guys are familiar with Lobster, which is actually in my logo.
Yeah.
And I'm just worried that it's going to be, because it's a free font, it's a nice looking font, that it's
a script,
that it won't be long before that becomes like the one everyone's hating on. But it's part of my logo if you look at it. So
I worry that like that and like Lavenderia are going to get burnt.
Yeah.
A lot of those Lost Type Foundry fonts are so beautiful. Which, by the way, you guys should check out Lost Type Foundry. It's free. Like if you don't, if you're nice, like give them some money, but it's you can opt to pay $0. It's a great foundry. But yeah, a lot of those typefaces like Fairview and stuff, like I use the hell out of that, and now it's like I'm not sure. I'm hesitating because I'm like, I don't know, this might be like getting into the territory of like free fonts, I think we kind of delved over kerning, and like some of our viewers are straight illustrators who maybe are struggling with type. Do we want to kind of explain kerning? I'll jump in at first just by saying, like, one of the things when I would teach this at LCAD that I'd intro it with, like when I'm talking about kerning to like illustrators who are like struggling getting designs, at a type class or a design class for illustrators, like went over this kind of stuff. Like one of the things that I would talk about was just the fact that if you put a square next to a square and you measure the distance between it, and then you take a circle, replace one of the squares, and keep it exactly that same distance, it actually looks further away. It's like an optical illusion that's created by the negative space between the two, like between a rounded edge and a sharp edge. It makes it look further away, whereas a sharp, like a straight edge and a straight edge, look closer together. So the basis, like that's what kerning is. Kerning is adjusting for that illusion, so that you create the illusion of equal distance between all your letters, even though technically they aren't really equal in distance, which is why like a really badly kerned font that's just by default really badly kerned will have just like perfectly equal distance between the letters, because it's actually not perfectly kerned in that case.
And the easiest fonts to design are like the block fonts, where the kerning is the same throughout all letters. Like if your H is the same size as your I or whatever. Well, not that. That's with the crossbar, you could have an H the same size as an I. But like, so here, like if you look at this, see the V and the A, this is kerned properly. Whereas normally that V might be over here, because with the two angles, see how close they are?
Yeah.
If it's kerned properly, it'll look like this. Otherwise, you'll see a big gap in between, because naturally, the A would come up. That would be the end of the A, so the V might start over here, and you've got a giant gap. So if you see something like this with the V and the A, that's the most obvious, I think.
Yeah.
But the problem is, like I was saying, when I was doing these fonts, because I've been designing these fonts, is there's so many different combinations, and the font program that I'm using will give examples of most of them, but you have to go through and manually move each one together. So if your A is next to a V, or if it's next to an X, what does it look like? What does one letter look like when it's next to another letter? And there's so many different letter combinations that it just takes a long time. So a really good typeface is gonna. I mean, there's a lot of that kerning involved. So it's a lot of work.
Do you want to get into like sort of bringing back to logos? Like, do you want to get into like how you would approach like kerning on a logo? Like, do you have any tricks for doing kerning really effectively for logos that you want to kind of share? Yeah,
and I'm like, when I design stuff, and like, so I also like the font that I forgot what I called it, but the font that I'm doing, like Bada Boom, a lot of my kerning in there is so close that the letters are touching, and that's a personal preference for me, because with comic stuff, I like that overlap. Yeah. So you'll have a B, and like part of it will overlap onto an O. Yeah. So that kerning is like super tight, but for that particular font, that's the way I like it. And then, if you want to, you can go in and, in whatever program you're using, and you can spread those out if you don't want them touching or whatever. But that's kind of the way I intended that. So, and I like to do that a lot. I like to, as long as it's legible, a lot of times I do like sometimes like my letters to touch or overhang, or, it's hard to say, because a lot of times it's just playing around with what's working, I'll take anytime, usually the way my process start, and I don't know, you guys can tell me if it's yours, but basically I'll go into Illustrator. I will type whatever the name of the product or whatever I'm doing the logo for. And then I'll just duplicate that in different fonts and look and see what I like. Mm-hmm. And then I break it apart. So it's, instead of being a font, it's actually artwork. So I can cut pieces off or add pieces to it. Yeah. Exactly. And then I'll just move that stuff around and everything. So yeah. And it's just a lot of playing around with it and everything. And it's a lot of practice, and it's something you can study if you're interested in. I mean, there's people that are just, type fiends that just live for type, and they can tell you all the do's and don'ts and things like that. And there's a lot involved, and I'm not like the best expert on type, but I've been doing it long enough that I think I got a pretty good handle on it. So
yeah. What about you, Kevin? Like with when it comes to like kind of kerning a logo, like kerning a company name, like you've picked your font, like how do you approach that?
You're gonna hate this answer.
Go for it.
I eyeball it mostly.
Oh, I eyeball a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because there's also That's not entirely true, but it's mostly true. And I'm being kind of facetious in a way, but it's like like I mean, I kind of do what Scott was talking about. Like right now, so I'm working on my band's logo, and I have like 1,000,001 fonts. I had sketched out a logo initially, so I still, you know, usually start with a sketch, even if it's just. Of course, I don't have anything laying around immediately, but even if it's just, you know, in my handwriting, but it conforms to a certain shape or something like that. Oh, actually, no, I can't show that. That's a company that I'm working for. Never mind. And then I kind of do what Scott's doing or was talking about, which right now, so the band name is Black Feathers. It's supposed to be kind of this, you know, aggressive gothy death rock band. You know, and I found a bunch of fonts that that I can now pick apart to create a new kind of thing from. Mm-hmm. So that means I'm gonna have to kind of mess with kerning because, you know, I see like a T that I like here that fits with a, you know, an A that I like over there, and I can see how I can fit those together because I have to change certain things about the A to make it conform with the sketch I have, you know, and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, looking at like, it's funny, right when you started talking about kerning, I was looking at this one font and feathers came out, feet hers. And stuff.
There's probably a blog somewhere on bad kerning where it's
well, there is like, you know, I mean, what's the famous one is anal rapist. You know? Yeah, it's probably a Tumblr somewhere, but yeah, so yeah, when coming up with a logo, you know, it's like when I'm doing it how I'm doing here and I'm pulling things apart and I'm going to change it. You know, there's certain things that you do that work sometimes, or that I do and that work sometimes and other times. But so I kind of create the initial look of everything, and then I try to go back and mess with the kerning. And you know, unfortunately, sometimes I'm like, "Ooh, shit, no one caught that," and I catch it like way later. You know what I mean?
No, I totally have that happen.
So you know, I'll have the fonts out, and at this point, they'll be what do you call it? Expanded objects, I guess. The fonts instead of you know, all type, you know. And at that point, you can kind of like separate those out, and then if you go to what is it? Where we find it here? Anyway, you can kind of align stuff. What is that called?
Snap to point.
Yeah, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But sometimes that doesn't work when you want it to like things to line up. Sometimes it'll like push some stuff way to the left, and some big thing will be in the middle.
Yeah.
And at that point, sometimes I'll go up and I'll hit, what is it? Is it Command R? Yeah, it puts on the ruler. Mm-hmm. And I'll actually go up to the corner where the ruler is I'm talking in Illustrator too. And I'll kind of eyeball it there using the ruler. Mm-hmm. And then I'll stand away from it, because you know, sometimes even when you do snap to point, things might be mathematically correct, but they still don't look right to your eyeball.
Yeah.
You know, and so at that point, you know, I'll kind of address what doesn't look right to me, and then it's almost like drawing at that point, where then it gets like real eyeball stuff, and then I'll look, you know, head on. You know, in the West we read from left to right. I'll see how that looks, and then when that looks, then I'll flip it, like mirror image it, and I'll put it upside down, which is like an old art school trick, mm-hmm. you know, to see if your drawing is good, you know, to see if like, you know, you got wonky eyes or some kind of weird bad proportion or something like that. So that's kind of how I do it.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not exactly like perfect, you know, like, but it makes it more art. It makes me feel like even though I'm doing a digital media, my hand and eye are still more involved, you know, as an artist, rather than, because, you know, sometimes you can see some graphic designers that they know the program more than they know the art or the design concepts and stuff like that.
So like when everything you mentioned, like I do. So I do eyeballing, I do snapping the point, I do like I like to view things sometimes just in the outline, like with the actual collection, as opposed to the like effect of a stroke or something on it. I also tend to like if it's really hardcore typographic stuff, I like to view it in grid mode. So I can base my spacing literally on like it's this many boxes.
Yeah, that's a tip that every time that, and it was funny because I just came back from Phoenix Design Week. We're at a conference and I forgot who was talking about it, but they were talking about how they do everything in grid mode. And I'm like, why am I doing that? Because anytime I accidentally switch on that grid, I'm like, how do I turn this thing off? But really for especially typography, I mean, that grid makes a lot of sense.
And then you have snap on, or you actually have it snapped to the grid so that when you're aligning it, it'll like literally just line right up with the grid. And then you can turn that off if you need to like eyeball it away and stuff. It's great. But one of the tips that I had really early on in type that helped me out a lot, because I struggled a lot with kerning because I just feel overwhelmed. Like I'd feel like I'd move one letter and then I had to move all the letters. And then it was like, it felt like just entering Pandora's box when I'm starting, where it's like, it's like you almost make it worse every time. And you're constantly trying to shift and then correct for that shift and correct for that shift. And I remember being really frustrated. And one of my early mentors in type, like came up behind me in class while I was just doing this, like, back and forth and back and forth for like, I had been doing this for like 2 days.
It can feel like really endless.
Word. And he was like, dude, just do this. And he basically put his hands over the screen on every letter but 3 of the letters. And he said, get those right. And I was like, what? He's like, just get those right. Just work on 3. And I'm like, okay. And then he's like, okay, now just shift a letter. Now get those right. And I was like, oh crap. And I use that trick to this day. So I take it in 3s and just literally like when those 3 are lined up, move over. When those 3 are lined up, move over. And if you do that, you end up with like really solid kerning. Whereas if you try to attack the entire, and this is mainly a tip for like, when you've done it for a while, it's easier to eyeball it because you kind of know like, okay, this O is going to have to move like 2 points over. Like you just start memorizing these things.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, it's like, that's a super, like, to me, that like opened the windows of kerning. That, and then just literally that fact of like box and circle, like those 2 things, I was like, oh, that's the big, like, to me, that was like the code that cracked it, where I was like, oh, you know, because I think a lot of industries like to use like terms like kerning and tracking, which is all that means is you're just pulling the letters apart or pushing them together, you know.
Yeah.
But you hear those words and they sound like mystical, and they're not. They just have weird terminology because they were invented back in the day when like people were doing these things with blocks, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like when you crack that code and you like realize like, oh, kerning isn't some mystical like artistic thing. It's just literally an optical illusion. You know, it's the fundamentals of an optical illusion. It's like, for me, that helped a lot. And I think if somebody's struggling with like kerning their type, or somebody's going, hey, fix the kerning on that, and you're like, I don't even know what kerning is, I just typed it, you know, like that's a really good starting point. At least for me, that helped a lot. That was a little trick. So,
that's a great tip. I wish I had heard that a long time ago.
There's a recommend in the chat. Benjamin Lau says, if you want to know more than you ever thought you would needed about typography, check out Elements of Typography Style by Robert Binghurst. So yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. I've got a really good book. I think it's called, I might have to go to my bookshelf and get it, but I think it's called The Logo Bible. I might have to go. You guys talk. I'm going to go see if I can find that because it's a really awesome book.
I think we should just leave it as like dead space till Scott gets back, just to make him feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm working on shit.
So like, to me, like, one of the things, like, once you like I don't like to think of the logo. Like if I have to come up with a design for like a logo, even before picking the typeface, I usually want a kind of direction for what kind of iconography I'm going to use, because that's going to tell me what I want my type pairings to look like. Whereas if I start with type and then I try to match it with a graphic, I feel more constrained.
Yeah, that's a good point, because one of the logos I'm doing for a client, and this one that I'm doing for my band right now, there are icons in the logo. Some of it's like replacement letter stuff, and that it's kind of part of the branding and stuff. And yeah, that is a great point to figure that stuff out, and like you'll save yourself so much time to make that icon first and get yourself or your client happy with it, versus trying to fit it in later. And especially like if you're getting paid hourly, whatever, but if you're getting paid by the project, that takes too long.
Oh yeah, agreed.
I found this book. It's called, looks like this. You see that? It's let's see, Logo, Font, and Lettering Bible by Leslie Cabarja. I don't know if it's still in print or not, but this is like super comprehensive. I mean, it's like it's the best logo book I have, but it's got, I mean, it's everything from layout to everything you need to know. I mean, it's even got little things in here like, what's wrong with this logo? And some of the stuff I was like, it pops right out, and some of it I don't know, it looks all right, and then they point it out, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's not right. But yeah, that's an awesome book.
Who did that book?
Her Leslie. It's Cabarga. So I don't know if that's Carbaja. I'm not sure, but
okay. I'm gonna check out both these recommended books here. I have I don't know if you guys had these. I just use them for reference, for influence, but because there's no like practical advice or anything in them. But since I tend to like older stuff, as evidenced by like Monkey Mod being based on 60s pop culture and stuff. But I have these custom lettering of the 40s and 50s.
Oh, cool.
Love it.
And it's just, it's just all it is full of logos.
Yeah, I've got like the newer ones are like the Logo Lounge puts out books, and they've got just a bunch of logos. But oh wow, look at that!
And then this is the same. These are edited by Ryan Hughes. So that was the 40s and 50s, and this is the 60s and 70s one.
Wow, that's sweet.
And there might be an 80s and 90s one, but I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s and the 90s. I don't need to see that shit again. I know that looks like the back of my hand.
Just put lasers.
Yeah, I did a workshop with Aaron Draplin, and if you ever watched any of his stuff, like just the stuff he collects and everything, and how he kind of does all this throwback stuff, and it's what he says is like, this stuff worked back in the 70s and it still works now, and it's true. I mean, a lot of that stuff is just, I mean, you can go through that older stuff and just mine so much stuff from it, because there's tons of good stuff in there.
Yeah, I also kind of tend to think a lot of that stuff from that time, it's got this I mean, there's some stuff that's very of its time, but there's a lot of things that are considered, with a modern eye, like, oh, that's classy, that's timely, or not timely, timeless, things like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think if you're in art and you're not looking at this whole wealth of like visual communication that exists for hundreds of years behind us, like one of my favorite reference points is just to look at old Sears catalogs from like the Victorian era. If you want to do Victorian type, look at what these guys were like knocking out, and that was their like lowest graphic design for a catalog, for like Sears, and yet it's just like this beautiful, crazy, ridiculous, like filigree filled stuff. Like they have these banjo ads in those that are like some of the most beautiful typography if you're into like super crazy filigree stuff. And yet, like, it's like you have to kind of look back to like the 1800s, and they republished those. And I guarantee like most people buying it, buying like the republished, 1800s Victorian catalog are probably designers, And so it's like, I think mining that and looking into the history of type and like, especially logo design, like picking an era, because there's some people where like minimal and like there's this era in the 70s, like early 70s, where if you look at logos, they were doing like really flat graphics that kind of came back, like back into vogue like a couple of years ago, and now they're kind of bringing gradients back a little bit.
Yeah.
But if you were like primarily doing logo design like 3 years ago, and you had all that data of like the old airline logos that were done in like the early 70s, and you look at like these logos that were all about flat, shape-based, like simplistic, because they were all coming out of the Saul Bass thing,
Oh,
so
yeah.
like that's like a whole realm of like language that you can use. But, like having a variety of that is great, because it really makes your job simpler. And it also fills you with all this data that you can then kind of mix and kind of spill out. It's kind of like, if you're going to play music, you probably should listen to music, Yeah. So.
That is.
Yeah, when you were talking about like the kind of the flat design versus now that some more gradients and stuff, I mean, there definitely are like trends in design. I'm not real good at that. Like I think there's something to be said for like following trends and things, but there's also I think for me, I think I have a pretty good understanding of good type versus bad type.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I fall under, because like for a while, I'm kind of trying to get more back into sort of graphic design, because in some ways I consider myself more of an illustrator than a designer, even though I kind of do both. But I don't follow design enough to really, I can't really identify the trends for the most part. I mean, there's some stuff that you just know because it's everywhere, but there's certain trends and things that I'm not following design closely enough to stay up on those trends. But I think a good design is a good design. So I think I can create a good design, but when it comes to trends, I'm not always the most current. So
yeah, but I think that's actually probably a good thing, because I think I think if you're chasing trends, you're not going to be making trends. And I think that it's super good to like it's really good when approaching, like, for instance, gradients are all popular now, but you should be making a design that's going to work in black and white. If you're going for like, especially like a branding for a corporation. And so like, if it looks good flat and it's working that way, adding gradients to it is only going to make it better. Whereas if it looks like crap and it's reliant on the gradients to pull off, the second you get rid of the gradient, like, you're going to have like a bad design. Like, so the bones, like the structure of it, just like kerning, like bad kerning is bad kerning, no matter what typeface you're using, Mm-hmm. And so it's like, if you take the time to kind of follow the fundamentals and you have good bones to your like a good skeleton to your design, then I think I'm just thinking of metal logos today, man. Bones and skeletons. Anyhow.
Well, I'm doing a Death Rock logo pretty close.
I know. I'm telling you, man, the next time you see me, I'm like gonna have my face painted white, it's like black gobs for eyes. But yeah, no, having a good structure isn't gonna get old, and that's not gonna go against trend, and so like, to me, like, that's why it's cool to look back at like designs that still hold up, like from the 60s. There's looks from the 60s that like House Industries built their entire foundry off of,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, the reason that foundry is successful is like it was good then and it's still good now. It's just good design,
Yeah.
Yeah. You had mentioned like making sure your logo looks really good in black and white and everything. I'm kind of at the point right now with my logo where I've changed it, and right now I kind of only like it in black and white. I'm using a lot more black and white than I used to, but so if you look, it's probably hard to see right now because it's so small, but even the little icon that's like, I don't know if I typed in the chat or whatever that you're seeing, but the one that's up now that hasn't been updated, I use my color scheme then, because before, and I'm kind of moving away from this, but before, a big part of my branding work was like kind of blueprints. So my logo had the blue gear, and then it had sort of the sort of orangish yellow hard hat, and then everything else was sort of grays. Like the stylus was a real dark, almost black gray, and then the wrench was a lighter gray. And I like that in color. But what I'm doing now is I'm kind of getting rid of those blueprints for the most part, and I'm trying to incorporate more of the lime green just from the lab coat. But I don't know if I like that in the icon as much, and I'm not happy with how it looks in color as much, because I've changed the gear to like, well, I've tried a couple. I've tried like a black gear, which I think looks all right, and then I've tried that lime green. And then I didn't know what to do like with the test tubes, because the wrench looked fine in gray, but the test tubes not so much. I mean, now they're sort of a cool gray, I think. But so I'm just not, so far I'm not really feeling the color version. So I think I'm just starting to use the black and white version more, for better or for worse. I don't know why I brought that up, but it's just something that's on my mind right now.
Well, I'm glad you brought up color, because I think that like one of the things that really impressed the hell out of me when I first met you and kind of checked out your portfolio was the color. Like you have a really good sense of like color and type pairing. It's like it's really impressive. And so like it's funny because you keep saying I'm not a designer, but you're totally a designer. You're just a designer who can draw better than most designers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I'm not a designer. I think I'm a pretty decent at design, but like I said, I just don't. There's a whole world around design, like, and you find that out when you go to like one of these conferences where most of the people there are designers, and they just know that language a lot better, I think, than I do. But I think I'm competent enough that I can fake it. Not fake it, because again, I think I'm a good designer, but I'm just not in that world as much as I'm sort of more in that kind of the people that kind of follow me and the kind of network that I'm in are more into like comics and stuff like that. And that's kind of more of the language I speak, I guess. So design's kind of a little bit different. Yeah, but I think the key, sorry, Josh, but I think the key as far as color and what I don't think I'm very good at color. Like, I am not a good painter. I'm a horrible painter. But unless it's just something like, I mean, I've done murals and stuff, but that's just matching what's in comics and things like that. But if I try to do like a fantasy painting, it would just look horrible. But for me, I think the key is I just try to limit my colors and stay sort of in that safe space of, just a few different colors. And because once I start to branch out from there, that's when it starts to look bad. So I usually stick to, like, when I design a print or something, an art print, I use a very limited color palette for that, for the most part.
Yeah, and I think limited color is one of those kind of key fundamentals of branding as well, So that's good you're mentioning that, Kevin, when you're thinking about like color, like let's say you have, although I feel like we haven't really touched on graphic,
Yeah, like, iconography, and
So let's get into that a little bit. Like, what's the thinking? I mean, what's the thinking process behind developing that?
So maybe I'll kind of combine a couple things, like what you guys were just talking about with the new kind of topic. So when I'm designing a logo, for example, my band or this like corporate logo that's completely different. Excuse me. I want one to look good that's just white on a dark background, black on a light background. And then when it comes to color, I like to keep it real simple. I prefer in a logo, if there's going to be color, no more than 2 colors.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes it might be like if an icon is worked into the logo, that might get a bolder color, but I'll also reverse the colors too, and then I'll set up the files, of course, so that the company can then go ahead and pick other colors, hoping that they don't go too stupid. But, so that, well, it depends, actually, now I'm saying this.
Well, I was going to say there's exceptions. Like if you're a color printer, your logo, you might want to include like in that icon, you might want to include like the company that sponsored this design conference I went to was Prism Color. Now, obviously, for something like Prism Printing or something, you want the very that gradient like rainbow as part of your icon. So there are exceptions to the rule, but I do agree with you. Most of the time, one or two colors. Like I'm just looking at the box in the back of you, Kevin, the U-Haul box. Now, I mean, that's also comes down to that screen printed on a box, so you don't want to use a lot of different colors. But it's basically two colors. It looks, from where I am, it looks like a green. It could be black, but it looks like a green.
Yeah, it's a dark green and an orange.
Yeah, and that looks really good. But I mean, and that's a little different. I'm pretty sure U-Haul's corporate are black and orange, but that green looks great. So I mean, and there sometimes you can kind of switch those colors up, but
yeah. So that's what I mean. It's like, so I want one. You have to do it. What's going to read the best, because you don't want to have like an icon that just completely makes the words disappear, and you just keep going to the icon.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's like an icon that the company's using a lot, they're going to want that to be, pretty prominent. But there's, God, I have so much I want to say about it. I don't even know where to start, really.
Yeah, but it's a tough one to condense,
Yeah, and and of course, you got to play around with stuff a lot of times, but basically that's my rule. I pick like two colors, if there's not, a set like color scheme for a company, for example, and then I try to find some balance, like the U-Haul thing totally works, because the U-Haul and the like kind of bounding box around it is all one color, and there's just like a line underneath U-Haul that's a different color, and it's kind of like designed element at that point. It's not necessarily, that bar is not an icon. They're not gonna...
That's actually that U-Haul thing is actually a perfect example of a logo that if you literally took all the color and just made it black, it'll still work.
Yeah.
So you could have that in like a legal line, Right.
And so that's why I say, I try to do white on dark, black on light version. That's just that, no color but white and no color but black, same logo. And then the other one, that'll be more colors that could be changed if the company wants, but basically, this one company that I'm doing a logo for now, they have an icon, and it looked really cool. It was kind of an accident, because I did their icon. Well, you've seen how I work on Illustrator when nothing is permanent yet. I use all wacky colors, so that I know that so that black is basically when I'm designing, this is permanent right now. If it's not, it's going to be pink or something like that. And anyway, so I'd done this icon and it was in pink, and I hadn't done anything to it yet, and had this idea for how I wanted to work into the logo and everything like that, and then found a font that I could tweak that was very similar to where I wanted to go. And so, I matched them up together, and I replaced one of these letters with this icon that, kind of worked out. And then I was like, oh, this looks really cool. But
accidents are the best, man.
But it was out of balance because of the one like shock of color, versus this black type. So the next thing to do was to find something that was not super important, but a design element that made the logo look a bit more classy to balance it. So you had the important color, a secondary color that was kind of a smaller, less important version where I could throw that color in there too, to add like it is design into the logo, and then it worked. You know, it's almost kind of like this U-Haul thing. You know, it's like, you know, there's a piece of different color there. You know, but maybe that's a bad example because that's only one piece of color, but it's not important. You know,
Yeah.
overall. Because you could take out that U-Haul, just in black out of that, the rest of the design, you'd still know, it'd still be recognizable even if you couldn't read English, you know, or, you know, that kind of stuff. But am I making sense? I'm just starting to babble now.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I think the thing that kind of gets me with logo design is like that part of it. I think is the hardest part is the icon thing.
Yeah.
Once you have like the icon or kind of the visual direction for it, it's a little easier to find type to pair with it, or even customize type to pair with it. But the trying to come up with a logo and get beyond the obvious, like one of the quickest solutions I see most people use is like they'll take like, especially like illustrators or designers, they'll take like the initials of their name and then like knock out like the counter of one and have like a letter in the negative space. Like they'll just kind of do a figure foreground flip with like two initials. And it's like it's a quick solution, and it's one of the first solutions you'd come up with if you're trying to like do that like a project in a type class where you're just using initials to make a logo. But it's like the first solution. So one of the things I always struggle with, you know, that's kind of the mystical part of design, is like that kind of throwing a lot of spaghetti at the walls and just kind of seeing what sticks. And I think a lot of that is just really just comes down to, first you need a really clear vision. So like that's where it really helps to get that like solid sentence from a client, because then you know what your target is. But then next you're just filling pages of thumbnails, you know, and that can be like a really long process of just like thumbnailing where it's not precious and you're just kind of moving things around and seeing what happens, you know?
Yeah.
Like you start with the obvious, you start with that thing like, you know, this business is global, so it's going to have a globe, you know, and like you move from that and go, well, what's less obvious? What's less obvious, you know? Because like Nike, I think their logo ended up being influenced by like Grecian, like a wing, you know, and it's like of like a Greek goddess or something. And
I think there wasn't there a goddess called Nike, or am I wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
or a god or something.
Yeah, something. There is a Nike character in mythology.
Yeah, so it's probably that. But the point being, like, that swoosh was probably not the first version. It was probably, I'd imagine there were probably a lot of iterations. Probably the first one was like doing a very literal wing, and or something like that, you know, or like maybe even a picture of somebody running. And then it kind of moves from there to simplification, and then you get the swoosh, but it's probably the first iteration probably isn't that arch. It's probably like a different kind of thing. And then you kind of move through it until you've come up with a solution. So that part to me is the most frustrating part about logos. And it's why I think when you quote a client on a logo, it's like you got to be cautious about what you're quoting, because you could end up biting off more than you can chew. Because logos are usually going to cost a little more, you know, because it's the brain power to make this simple thing that everybody thinks takes like 5 minutes, you know, or it goes on Fiverr and they get their globe.
Yeah.
And that globe probably is somebody else's logo that they didn't realize, and then maybe they get sued by that other company. But anyhow, it's a complicated thing to make a good logo. And for me, it's like that's the Pandora's box of logos, is the icon. And I think most designers would kill to get to that point where you have that brief moment of genius where you make like the FedEx arrow, you know, like like
a lot of that stuff is like just sometimes it's just like a happy accident, and you can kind of sometimes you can get lucky or unlucky with whatever you're being presented with as far as the company name or whatever. Sometimes they have Like the initials are just perfect. Like they work together. Like one that I really like is like sort of like a U and like a lowercase n, but you know the capital N style that looks like a lowercase n, but it doesn't. It's basically, it looks like the upside down U. And sometimes if you get those two letters together, you can do a lot with them because it's like just the letter flipped. Yeah. But you never know. I mean, you kind of have to see what you get as far as what the initials are, or you know, whatever, maybe the tagline or anything like that. And you gotta have to see what you can do out of it. And sometimes you just find something that works. And it's like, oh man, this is just like a perfect situation. This would not have worked with another brand or something like that. So I mean, those are the kind of things I really like. And then sometimes you just get something like these letters, they just don't work together, you know, so you got to find a different solution.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, you know, it's hard to get that if you're like having to do a logo for Best Coffee, you know, like, cause at that point you don't have a lot to start with, you know? So it's like, it really depends on the company and how like invested they are. If it's your own brand though, I just would recommend, like, you know, even if you're an illustrator who struggles with type, maybe for branding, hire a graphic designer. Like, I mean, if you don't want to dip into type yourself, I would recommend not, because I think, like, I've always been of the opinion, if you can draw, you can design, you know. But yeah, I would even recommend people hire a designer, because it really says a lot about your company. And, you know, if you're an illustrator or whatever, and you're expecting people to invest in you to help them look visually good, or like visually communicate an idea, like, you know, that type is visually communicating something to those people you're trying to have hire you to do visual communication. So I think we've kind of cracked into it a little bit. It feels like Pandora's box though, because like when it comes to like, especially that, because it's work, you know, and it's like, it's a lot of work, and it's hard to kind of pin down. I always have trouble estimating logos, you know?
Yeah. Well, the difference. Also, no, go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say it's rough with clients too. Sometimes I find anyway, where I want a logo, and if you do it too fast, they're like, you know, why is it so expensive? You know,
it's expensive because it's your brand. It's what's going to be on every single thing you have, and you're going to use it over and over again.
Right.
So why not invest in that? I mean, and that's the difference between like a logo. With a logo, at least the way I price, and I think this is pretty much sort of the standard, is, you know, a logo is usually, once you design it, they own it. It's not like an illustration, where an illustration you sell, you should be selling, a lot of people don't, but you should be selling limited rights, or if they want the full rights, then that's going to be a lot more expensive. Whereas a logo is just like, you know, and the prices of logos can just range so much. I mean, of course, there's people on Fiverr doing them, but I mean, logos can cost upwards of $10,000 or more. I mean, if it's a big enough company and that thing is going to be put on everything, I mean, that's not a bad investment for a big company. And sometimes they even spend more than that. Like, it's like a logo could be 30 grand for like a Fortune 500 company or something, like, or more, maybe 100 grand.
I mean, like, the thing is, like, so I'm going to Adobe Max. You just got back from a conference. There's some guys that are heavy hitters, like, when it comes to logo designs. Like one of the speakers is Aaron Draplin, which is going to be awesome because he's amazing. But he's one of those guys that if you were a company and you hired him to do your logo, it may not take him that long to give you a logo that will brand you so iconically
right,
that you're going to make a lot of money just off your logo. And it's going to be unique and individual and branded, and, you know, it's going to be something you don't have to revise a lot.
Yeah, and there's some logos. Sorry, I was just going to say there's some logos that look so good that people do. It's not just like it's on your product. I mean, people will wear it because it looks great. And think of all the merchandise people are selling with just that logo. And you tell me that that's not worth it if it took you 5 minutes and you're making millions of dollars off of it?
Yeah. And so, but with Draplin, like, I know from videos that I've watched of him, like, he's not charging like small sums. Like, so he's more in the upwards quotes that Scott was talking about, and if not higher. and that's usually for like, you know, pretty quick work. And I don't think it's super quick. I mean, I think there's consideration and stuff, but this guy specializes in logos.
Yeah, when he does his talk, he usually shows all these logos, and he says, some of these logos I didn't get paid anything from these. Some of these are just my friends. Some of them I got paid $30,000 for. So, but people can't tell the difference. And he basically says that he basically fooled the people into hiring him because he did all these logos for his friends and stuff, and people can't tell the difference. So
yeah, and that's a good testament for like always doing your best work. Because you never know. Like, so even if you're taking a gig that you feel is like a small paying client or something, like knocking it out of the park, like that in your portfolio might lead to like that $30,000 gig or whatever. So, but I think that what I'm getting at is like, you know, you're not going to be paying him for the hour, you know, most of the time. You would be paying for the expertise and the fact that like you're saving money because you'll probably spend upwards above that just trying to fix a logo by somebody who doesn't specialize in it. You know,
yeah.
So it's like, it's one of those things of like, you know, you're hiring a specialist, and hiring a specialist, like if I hire a bodyguard and they spend a lifetime learning like some martial art, you know, and then they use that martial art and it's like 5 minutes and they charge me a bunch of money for it. Well, hell, I didn't spend a lifetime like perfecting a martial art so I could take somebody out, you know.
yeah, that's a good, I like that analogy.
Yeah, I mean, so you're going to pay a bodyguard a little more than you'd pay just like maybe somebody who's walking behind you taking notes, you know? Like there's different specialties, and when you're paying a specialist, you're paying for somebody who specializes in something that they...
Yeah, because you want that bodyguard to kick some guy's ass in 5 minutes as opposed to a half hour. So what does it matter? Yeah.
So I feel like to kind of get closer to closing on this, do you guys want to kind of touch on some stuff that annoys the hell out of you that clients do to a good logo?
Yeah, let's see. Are we getting into like we could do a whole other show on like problem clients and things like that. Is that what you're talking about? Or
specifically like you know, the logo jobs I've had iterations of a logo that looked really great, and then they just gradually got worse every round of revision.
Yeah. It's usually, and you know, when you show your samples, you know, sometimes you throw a few in there just to they'll throw away, but then every once in a while they'll pick one that was a throwaway that they like.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I feel like it's a misnomer that a lot of people spread around in like art school, where they're like, you know, what you do is you make all your roughs like really bad and then the one you want really good. And then like you're helping that client like target that good thing. You learn pretty quickly in freelance not to do that, because a lot of the time they pick the worst one, and then you're stuck with that, and stuck with that, and you have nothing for your portfolio, and you've kind of like robbed the client. It's just not a, like, I wish that worked, but it doesn't. I've never seen it work. Has that ever worked for you, Scott? I don't know. I've never seen that work.
Where you put the throwaways in and they don't pick them, or that they do pick them?
No, like, have you ever seen it work where you put the throwaways in and it works like clockwork, like every time, where they don't?
Sometimes it's you can't count on it. So I mean, it's kind of like you hopefully want to do something that you'll be satisfied no matter what. But there's always one that usually there's one that's like far and away you like better, and it's typically not the one they pick. But you know, and it's just a weird process, because they'll not like the one that you're kind of moving towards, and then you start working on the other one. And then, at least for me anyway, the more I start working on it, the more usually I start to like it. Yeah. You know, sometimes it's just a direction that maybe I was hyper focused on one way, and that's not the exact way they want to go. And you have to respect that, because in the end, that's their brand. That's, you know, hopefully you can use your expertise to, if you're really, to kind of help them along and everything. But if they want to go in this certain direction, then that's kind of how you have to go. And then a lot of times when it's done, it's like, it turned out pretty good. It's not that bad that they went in that direction, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, most of my experiences have gone like that, but I've had a few nightmare situations where it's like, we get it to perfection, collaborating, And then they're like, okay, take those colors that work in harmony and flop them. And you're like, these colors clash. And they're like, no, those are the colors. Let's do those colors. And at some point, you just kind of, you sell it, you try to sell it. But at the end of the day, like, they're the person walking into the restaurant. They're the one asking for, like, pork rare. And you're like, I don't know if, like, pork's the best, like, meat to cook rare, because there's like a lot of health risks with that. Okay, I guess you want, like, okay, go for it. Have a rare sausage or a rare bacon. Like, it. The point being, like, at some point, like, the paying customer, it's either you have to be prepared to walk from that gig, or you just kind of have to be prepared to just do the weird change. But like, I always find that unfortunate, because that goes back to the specialist thing I was talking about, where I think if somebody goes into hiring like a designer for a logo, and yes, you should communicate with that designer if you're really, like, you want a product you're happy with. But at the end of the day, you should also understand that like there are things that work in design that a designer is going to know, like a specialist is going to know things that work, like martial arts that work, more than like somebody who watches a lot of Kung Fu flicks,
Yeah.
Like, so there's some things that maybe they look effective on screen, but they don't work. And that's where, like, a specialist is going to be able to chime in and be like, no, you see, like, how you do that move is you actually do this. Same thing with, like, with illustration or design, where it's like there are certain things that really work. And so I think, kind of like if you hire a plumber, maybe what they're saying is wrong with your toilet is right, as opposed to, like, your thought on it, because they do this all the time. They know what to do to fix the pipes. And, I drawing the analogies there, but I just feel like with logo, like when we're approaching logo design, I also want to encourage people, when they, like, let's say you're an illustrator, you need somebody who's good at type to do your branding. Trust them a bit, Yeah.
Yeah, I have a client right now who has picked the worst one, and we're on our second direction right now. Pick the worst one out of that, and also who has said before, "Oh, design by committee sucks, huh?" And I'm like, "Yep. Guess what's happening though? Design by committee." That is one of my pet peeves of everything.
Yep.
Illustration, logo, branding, whatever.
Yeah.
And, like, look, it's your company. It's not your supervisor's company.
Yep.
It's not your wife's company or your daughter's company or your brother or sister-in-law's neighbor's company. I'm going to show this to all these people and get their opinions, what they think.
Yeah.
Dude, 100%. And like, thinking about that just in the context of anything creative, like, music by committee is terrible, man. Like, music that everybody likes is not music. It's like, if you want something that makes a statement or says something, there's going to be people who dislike it. And if it's an effective logo, like, there's a lot of people who hate the FedEx logo. As popular as the logo is with designers, there's a lot of people who hate it and are probably like, well, that just looks boring, like, but that it served them very well. So it's like, I think, and the Nike logo is really simple, but there, so there's a lot of people who might look at that if that's their first version for their company. And if they're doing the committee thing, they're going to have that one person who's going to say, like, well, I kind of like shapes that are a little more complicated than just like a little bend, like, and then you've got a revision killing one of the most iconic logos in the world. Not that all logos are that, but it's just, I think viewing it, walking into a relationship like that with a client on a logo where they're branding themselves, and, if clients and artists can kind of collaborate, that's the ideal situation. So.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, do you guys feel like we hit it?
I mean, I think we could talk on and on about logos and this stuff, but yeah, we probably need to wrap it up because I mean it's just like it's one of those things. I mean we could have a whole just the Artcasters could just be talking about logos and we could probably keep talking about them, but
10 years later, we're still live streaming. And just like, and you know what else kills me about kerning? Yeah. All right. Well, so should we kind of let everybody know where to find us? You guys are on my channel right now, so you know where to find me. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit the little subscribe button, and there's apparently a bell. And if you hit that bell, it'll give you a notification anytime there's going to be a live stream on my channel or something like that. And there's sometimes where that doesn't work to notify you, and Scott will get into how you guys can kind of get around that. Other than that, just check out my comic that I'm currently working on inking at quarterlystories.com, or you can go to topis.io. In about 30 minutes, there will be a new page up on there, and just search for Quarterly Stories. So that's my long-winded where you can find me. Kevin, where can people find your work? I'm sure most of our people are subscribed, but in case anyone hasn't subscribed to your channel or checked out your work, where can they find you?
My YouTube channel is youtube.com/KevinCrossArt. I've got a new band that's going to have a YouTube channel if anybody cares about punk rock and death rock and gothy stuff. If you like the Misfits and Bauhaus, that kind of thing. You can go to Instagram at blackfeathers_PDX, which is the airline code or the airport code for Portland. We'll have announcements there with music and, how to find our YouTube channel. But my sorely, and I swear someday I will update my website with where that could be the hub again. But that's kevincross.net.
Love it. And Scott, why don't you let everybody know where to find you and also how they can subscribe?
Yeah, so I'm a CircWorks on YouTube, and like I said earlier, I've got a brand new website, and there will be, like I said, there will be some changes coming to that website. But right now, I'm pretty happy with how it looks right now. If you want to go there, check it out. There's an online store there. If you're a comic book artist, there are there's like links to all the tools I use and stuff like that. There's some cool stuff up there, and there'll be more to come. But so that's at circworks.com. And as far as the Artcasters, we do this every week, and it switches back and forth from Josh's channel to my channel. We always have a special guest. Today it's Kevin. Next week it'll be somebody else. And if you want to know exactly where we're going to be, because we don't always go on at the same time every week. It just kind of depends on our schedule. We try to keep it about the same, but it can fluctuate. So if you want to know when we're going to be, what time we're going to be, all that good stuff, you could hit that bell, you could do all that stuff, but you're not always notified. So the best way to do that is just there should be a link in the description of this video to our newsletter. And we don't spam you or anything like that. We just like to send out a little notification about 30 minutes ahead of time to let you know when we're going to go live. And if you sign up for that newsletter, you will never not be in the know.
All right, guys. So I will close it out. So goodbye.
Bye, and thanks to everyone in the chat.
Oh, and let us know, if you guys have any tips or anything, you guys kind of know, guru secrets or something that we need to know about type or logo design, please let us know in the comments, because I think all of us are always open to learning new tricks and stuff like that. And Kevin, thanks for coming on again, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Good hanging out.
For sure.